Thought process: the sun was beaten down on the asphalt of Los Angeles, but inside the garage it was even hotter. The air conditioning had been broken for months, and the heavy smell of oil, gasoline, and burnt rubber hung in the air like a thick fog. Mark wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm, leaving a streak of black grease across his skin. He leaned over a chrome engine, his hands deep in the guts of a machine that refused to cooperate. Mark was a mechanic, and a good one, but he was tired. He worked at a place called Steel City Choppers, a shop that looked flashy from the outside with its neon signs and polished floors, but was rotten on the inside. The owner, a man named Frank, didn't care about motorcycles. To Frank, bikes weren't machines of freedom or engineering marvels. They were just ways to squeeze money out of people. "Hey, Mark." Frank's voice boomed across the garage, echoing off the metal walls. "Did you tell that guy with the Harley that his chain needs replacing too? Don't just fix the brake, upsell him." Mark sighed, tightening a bolt with a sharp twist of his wrist. "No, Frank," he muttered. "The chain is fine. He only needs the brakes." "I'm not lying to him." Frank stormed over, his face red. He wasn't a grease monkey. He was a businessman in a cheap suit that he tried hard to keep clean. "It's not lying, you idiot. It's business. That chain has 10,000 miles on it. It could go? Tell him it's a safety hazard. Get the money." Mark shook his head. "I can't do that. The guy has 3 kids. I saw him counting his cash in the parking lot." Frank rolled his eyes so hard it looked like they might get stuck. "You are too soft, Mark. One of these days, your honesty is going to get you fired." Mark just went back to work. He was used to this speech. Every day was a battle. Mark loved motorcycles. He respected the engineering, the history, and the people who rode them. He believed that if a mechanic touched a bike, he was responsible for the rider's life. You don't mess with brakes, and you don't steal parts just to make a quick buck. But at Steel City, honesty was a weakness. Around 4 p.m., the shop was mostly empty. The other mechanics were goofing off in the back, waiting for the clock to hit 5. Mark was cleaning his tools, organizing his wrenches by size. He liked things to be in order. It was the only thing he could control in a chaotic job. The bell above the front door chimed, signaling a customer. Usually Mark ignored it, letting the floor guys handle it, but the shop was quiet. He looked up from his toolbox. Walking in was a man in a worn-out leather jacket and a helmet tucked under his arm. He looked dusty, like he had been riding on the highway for hours. He had a beard that looked like he hadn't shaved in a week and messy hair. He didn't look like the typical Hollywood type that usually drifted in with way too much money and not enough sense. He looked tired and he looked worried. "Is anyone here to help?" the man asked. His voice was soft, polite. He didn't have that demanding tone that most customers had. Mark walked over. "Yeah, I'm Mark. What can I do for you?" The man let out a long breath. "I hope so. My bike died about 2 miles down the road. I had to push it here. It's awful. It just locked up on me." "Where is it?" Mark asked. "Outside on the curb. I didn't want to block the driveway." Mark grabbed a rag and walked outside. Sitting on the curb was a vintage motorcycle. It was old, beautiful, and clearly loved. It was a Norton Commando, a classic British bike. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like a piece of junk, but Mark saw the details. The chrome was polished to a mirror shine despite the dust. The leather seat was well oiled. This was a machine that someone took care of. Just as Mark was looking at the bike, Frank came out of his office. He always seemed to smell a new customer like a shark smells blood. Frank walked out the front door, adjusting his tie. He looked at the man, then looked at the bike. Then he looked closer at the man. Frank's eyes went wide. He stopped in his tracks. Mark saw the recognition on his boss's face. "Holy," Frank whispered under his breath. He pasted on a giant, fake smile and rushed forward, his hand extended. "Sir, welcome." "Oh, what a pleasure to have you here." The customer looked confused. He took Frank's hand slowly. "Hi, thanks, I just need help with my bike." "Anything you need? Anything at all?" Frank said, his voice dripping with eagerness. Mark realized who it was now that he was looking closely. It was Keanu Reeves, the actor. The guy from the movies. But right now, he didn't look like a movie star. He looked like a guy who was stranded. Keanu didn't seem interested in the fame part. He pointed to the Norton. The engine seized? Or the transmission? I'm not sure. I was riding and there was a loud clunk and then it just stopped. I had to push it all the way here in this heat. Frank nodded vigorously, though he didn't know a carburetor from a spark plug. Seized engine? Yes, tragic. These old bikes, they are money pits. But don't worry, we are the best in the city. Frank stepped in front of Mark, blocking his view of the engine. Mr. Reeves, I'm Frank, the owner. We can absolutely fix this. But you have to understand, with a vintage machine like this, it's not going to be a simple fix. It's going to be a big job. We are talking a full teardown. We'll need to check the pistons, the crankshaft, the gearbox. This is going to take weeks. Maybe a month. Keanu's shoulders dropped. He looked genuinely sad. A month? I have a trip planned on this bike next week. It means a lot to me. I know, Frank said, putting a hand on Keanu's shoulder, trying to act like a buddy. But you want it done right, don't you? You don't want to be stuck on the side of the road again. We are talking about easily $5,000, maybe $6,000? Just to start. Mark stood there listening. He watched Keanu's face. The actor wasn't looking at the price. He was looking at the bike with pure heartbreak. Then Mark looked at the bike again. Something didn't add up. A seized engine that required a months-long teardown usually smoked or smelled terrible. This bike didn't smell like burnt oil. It just smelled hot. Frank kept talking, trying to lock in the massive contract. We can store it inside. We'll give you the VIP treatment. Just sign right here and we'll get started tomorrow. Keanu hesitated. I don't know. Let me think about it. Mark cleared his throat. Actually, Frank. Frank spun around, shooting Mark a death glare that said, "Shut up or you're fired." Actually, Mark said, ignoring the glare, I haven't looked at it yet. You said it made a clunk and stopped? Keanu looked at Mark, his eyes hopeful. Yeah, just one loud clunk and then the rear wheel locked up for a second, then it went free. But the engine was dead. Frank laughed nervously. Nonsense. Mark here is just a junior mechanic. He doesn't handle high-profile restorations. Mr. Reeves, trust me. Can you just check it? Keanu asked Mark, cutting Frank off. Please? Just tell me what you hear. Frank looked like he was about to explode, but he couldn't tell Keanu Reeves no in front of his own employee. Fine. Go ahead, Mark. Take a quick look. Mark knelt down beside the Norton. He didn't grab a computer or a scanner. He grabbed a wrench and a pair of gloves. He listened. He touched the engine casing. It was hot, but not that hot. He grabbed the kickstarter. It felt solid. He put the bike in gear and rocked it back and forth. Click, click. It wasn't the engine. The engine was turning over. It wasn't seized. Mark stood up and walked to the side of the bike. He knelt down and looked at the chain and the rear sprocket. There was a small, shiny piece of metal lying on the asphalt, covered in grease. He picked it up. It was a washer, a specialized locking washer, but it was broken. He looked up at the drive chain. Following it back to the transmission, there, the linkage where the kickstarter connects to the engine. A single bolt had come loose, fallen out, and jammed between the moving parts. That was the clunk. It had jammed the kickstarter gear, which stopped the engine from turning. It wasn't a seized engine. It wasn't a dead transmission. It was a loose bolt. A 5-cent part. Mark looked at Frank. Frank was turning pale. He knew if Mark said what he was thinking, the $5,000 job was gone. Well? Keanu asked, stepping closer. Is it dead? Mark looked at the actor. He saw a man who loved his machine. He saw a man who was being lied to. Mark wiped his hands on his rag. He took a deep breath. He knew what happened to people who embarrassed Frank, but he also knew he couldn't let this happen. It's not the engine, Mr. Reeves, Mark said clearly. And it's not the transmission. Frank's jaw dropped open. Mark, what are you? It's a loose linkage, Mark continued, looking right at Keanu. A bolt fell out of the Kickstarter mechanism and got jammed in the gears. That's what caused the clunk. I can see the scrape marks where it hit. If we take that piece of metal out and put a new bolt in, you'll be riding home in an hour. The silence in the shop was deafening. Even the other mechanics in the back had stopped laughing to watch. Keanu blinked. Really? Just a bolt? Just a bolt, Mark nodded. And maybe a new battery. She sounds a little slow turning over. But that's it. The engine is solid. Keanu let out a breath that sounded like he had been holding it for a mile. Oh, thank God, that is amazing news. Frank stepped forward, his face purple with rage. Mr. Reeves, please. Mark doesn't know what he's talking about. These diagnostics are complex. I strongly advise, how much for the bolt? Keanu asked, ignoring Frank completely. Mark looked at Frank, then back to Keanu. Parts and labor? Maybe $100. If you have the cash? Keanu actually smiled. It was a genuine, relieved smile. I have cash. I can wait? Mark glanced at the clock. It was 4:30 p.m. My shift ends at 5, Mark said. Come back then. We'll get you fixed up. Frank grabbed Mark by the arm, dragging him toward the office. You are done, Frank hissed in his ear. You are absolutely done here. Do you hear me? You just cost me $5,000. Mark pulled his arm free. He looked at Keanu, who was standing by his bike, looking at it like it was his best friend again. I hear you, Frank, Mark said quietly. But at least he's riding home tonight. The air in the garage felt heavy after Frank stormed back into his office. You could hear the slamming of the door, followed by the muffled sound of him shouting into his phone. Mark stood alone on the concrete floor, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He knew he had crossed a line. Frank didn't care about the truth. Frank only cared about the invoice. By telling Keanu Reeves the truth, Mark had effectively lit a match and thrown it directly into a gas tank. He had maybe cost the shop thousands of dollars, and in Frank's mind, that was a crime worse than stealing. The other mechanics, guys who usually joked around and threw rags at each other, were suddenly very busy working on their own projects. They didn't look at Mark. They knew better than to get caught in the crossfire. Mark wiped his hands on a rag again, his heart beating a little faster than normal. He wasn't usually a rebel. He paid his taxes, he showed up on time, and he did his job. But today, seeing the look on Keanu's face, that pure relief mixed with gratitude, it made him feel like he had done something right for the first time in a long time. Mark walked over to the parts counter. He needed to see if they even had the bolt he needed. He dug through the plastic bins labeled hardware and miscellaneous. It took a few minutes, but he found it. A simple zinc-plated bolt. It probably cost 10 cents. He also grabbed a new locking washer and checked the inventory for a battery filter. It was all there. Simple parts for a simple problem. It was almost laughable how easy the fix was compared to the disaster Frank had predicted. Around 5 p.m., the sound of air, wrenches, and loud rock music stopped as the other guys began to pack up. Frank emerged from his office, putting on his suit jacket. He looked at Mark with cold, dead eyes. He walked over, his expensive shoes clicking on the oil-stained floor. He didn't say a word to the other employees. He stopped right in front of Mark, close enough that Mark could smell his cologne, which smelled like chemicals and arrogance. I'm leaving for the night, Frank said, his voice low and dangerous. You are going to lock up. I expect you to do exactly what I pay you to do, which is nothing until tomorrow. And Mark? If I find out you did anything to that bike before I write up a proper estimate, don't bother coming back. Ever. Mark looked him in the eye. He didn't flinch. I'll lock up, Frank. Frank stared at him for a long second, trying to find fear, but Mark was too tired to be afraid. Frank grunted, grabbed his briefcase, and walked out the front door. The silence that followed was the best part of Mark's day. Mark slowly walked around the shop, turning off the main lights. He left one bay light on, the one above the Norton. He locked the front door and flipped the sign in the window to closed. Then he waited. He sat on a crate and drank a lukewarm soda, looking at the motorcycle. It really was a beautiful machine. It had character. It had history. It didn't belong in a shop that tried to cheat people. About 20 minutes later, a shadow appeared at the front door. Mark stood up and unlocked it. Keanu Reeves stood there, carrying a small paper bag. He was wearing the same leather jacket, but he looked a little more relaxed now. "Hope I'm not too early," Keanu said, stepping inside. He looked around the dark shop. "It's quiet in here now." "Just how I like it," Mark said. "The boss is gone. The noise is gone. It's just the bikes." Keanu walked over to the Norton and ran his hand along the gas tank. "I really appreciate this. I was dreading leaving this bike here for a month. I've had it for years. It's not just a bike to me, you know? It's where I go when I need to disappear." Mark nodded. He understood perfectly. "I get it. Cars are just to get from A to B. A bike. A bike is an experience. You're part of the road. You feel the wind, the rain, the temperature changes. It grounds you." "Exactly," Keanu said, smiling. "Cars are cages." Mark grabbed his tools and rolled the creeper seat over to the bike. "All right, let's get you uncaged." For the next hour, the shop wasn't a place of business. It was a sanctuary. Mark worked efficiently. He took off the side casing, exposing the gears. Sure enough, the broken piece of the locking washer was sitting right there, jammed in the Kickstarter gear. He carefully fished it out with a pair of needle-nose pliers. "Look at that," Mark said, holding up the tiny piece of metal. That's all it was. This little thing caused all that trouble. Keanu leaned in, looking closely. "Unbelievable. I thought I blew the engine." "It happens," Mark said. He cleaned the gears, checked for any scratches, and found none. No damage. "We got lucky." He grabbed the new bolt and washer he had found earlier and threaded it in by hand first, making sure it was straight. Then he torqued it down. Tight, but not too tight. While Mark worked, Keanu didn't act like a big movie star checking his phone or demanding special treatment. He just watched. He asked questions about the engine, about the specific model of the Norton, and about how long Mark had been a mechanic. He listened to the answers like they actually mattered. "You're really good at this," Keanu said as Mark wiped oil off the casing. "You move like you've done it 1,000 times. 20 years, Mark said, wiping his forehead. "Started when I was a kid in my dad's garage. I just love that things make sense. If a bolt is loose, you tighten it. If it breaks, you replace it. It's honest work." "Seems like that's hard to find these days," Keanu said softly. He was looking around the shop, probably thinking about how Frank had tried to rip him off. "People are greedy," Mark said, putting the side cover back on. "But not everyone. Most mechanics I know are good guys. They just get stuck working for guys like Frank." Mark finished tightening the last screw. He stood up and kicked the bike's kickstand. He grabbed the handlebars and put the bike in neutral. "All right." Moment of truth. He swung his leg over and kicked the starter down. Vroom. The engine roared to life instantly. The sound was deep and throaty, echoing off the walls of the empty shop. It purred smoothly, no knocking, no clunking. It sounded perfect. Mark let it run for a minute, listening to the rhythm, checking the smoke coming from the pipes, which was clear. He twisted the throttle a few times, and the engine responded eagerly. Mark cut the engine and the silence returned, but it was a good silence this time. "She's ready," Mark said. Keanu let out a laugh, a genuine sound of pure joy. He walked over and shook Mark's hand firmly. "You have no idea how happy this makes me, seriously." "You're good to go," Mark said, feeling that familiar satisfaction of a job well done. "Just keep an eye on those linkage bolts. Maybe check them every few months." "I will," Keanu promised. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick roll of cash. It was a lot of money. He tried to hand it to Mark. "Please, take this. You saved my trip, and honestly, you saved me from a huge headache." Mark looked at the money, then at Keanu. He gently pushed Keanu's hand away. "I can't take that. It's too much." "But you stayed late," Keanu insisted. "You used your own time. You saved me from that crook. I did it because it was the right thing to do, Mark said. And I'm not going to charge you friend prices because we aren't friends yet. Just $100 for the bolt and the battery check, like I said. Maybe $200 to be safe for the shop inventory? Keanu looked at him, stunned. He put the roll of cash back in his pocket and pulled out a few bills instead. Okay, but I'm coming back here. I need a good mechanic. And next time, I'm tipping you whether you like it or not. Mark smiled for the first time all day. Deal. Keanu put on his helmet and gloves. He straddled to Norton. He looked down at Mark one last time. Thank you, Mark. You're a good man. Safe rides? Mark said. Keanu kicked the starter, and the bike roared to life again. He navigated carefully out of the shop bay and into the cool night air. Mark watched him go, seeing the red taillight fade into the distance. For a moment, everything felt right. He had done a good job, helped a nice guy, and stood up to Frank, but as the taillights disappeared, Mark looked around the dark, empty shop. The reality of what he had done came crashing back. He had directly disobeyed an order from his boss. He had made Frank look stupid in front of a celebrity. He had fixed the bike for a fraction of the cost. He walked over to the office door and looked at the lock. He knew that tomorrow morning, when the sun came up, his life at Steel City Choppers was likely over. He hung up the keys, turned off the final light, and walked out into the night, wondering if honesty was really worth the price of unemployment. The next morning, the sun didn't feel warm on Mark's face. It felt harsh and exposing, like a spotlight in a police interrogation. He stood in the parking lot of Steel City Choppers for a long time, just looking at the sign. It was a flashy sign, painted in bright red and silver, promising quality service and integrity. Both words that Frank couldn't spell without a dictionary. Mark took a deep breath, the air still smelling of the city's morning exhaust, and walked toward the garage door. He knew what was coming. He had felt it in his gut the second Keanu Reeves rode away into the night. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The mechanics, guys he had worked shoulder to shoulder with for 3 years, wouldn't make eye contact. Usually, mornings were loud radios blasting classic rock. People laughing about their weekends. The sharp hiss of pneumatic tools testing the air pressure. Today, it was a tomb. The silence was thick and sticky. When Mark walked in, the other guys suddenly found their toolboxes incredibly interesting. One guy, a younger mechanic named Dave, who usually looked up to Mark, just shook his head sadly and looked away. Mark walked to the back to punch his time card. Beep, beep. He was officially on the clock, though he doubted he'd be working for long. He grabbed his blue coveralls and put them on. The grease stains on the fabric were familiar like old friends. He walked to his designated bay, expecting to find a car waiting for him. It was empty. He stood there for a moment, his hands hanging by his sides, feeling useless. He grabbed a rag and started wiping down a workbench that was already clean, just to have something to do with his hands. You really did it, didn't you? The voice came from behind him. Mark didn't need to turn around to know it was Frank. He wasn't shouting. That was the scary part. His voice was quiet, calm. It was the voice of a man holding a sledgehammer behind his back. Mark turned around slowly. Frank was standing in the doorway of his office, the manager nameplate on the door catching the light. He was holding a stack of papers. He walked into the shop, his expensive shoes tapping on the concrete. He stopped a few feet from Mark. He didn't look angry. He looked like he was looking at a bug he had just stepped on. I did my job, Frank, Mark said, keeping his voice steady. The bike had a loose bolt. I fixed it. Frank let out a short, dry laugh that didn't reach his eyes. You fixed it. After hours. Without a written estimate. Without authorization. And you charged him $100 for a repair that should have been billed at $5,000. It wasn't a $5,000 repair, Mark said, his voice rising a little. It was a 10-cent bolt. You wanted to rebuild his whole engine just to steal his money. Frank stepped closer, getting into Mark's personal space. He smelled like expensive coffee and bad intentions. It's not stealing, Mark. It's business. That man is a millionaire. He wouldn't have noticed $5,000. But you had to play the hero? You had to be the good guy, Frank made air quotes with his fingers. I treated him the way I treat every customer, Mark said. He's a human being, Frank. He was scared his bike was dead. I gave him the truth. The truth doesn't pay the lease, Frank shouted, finally losing his cool. His face turned that familiar shade of purple. He slammed the papers he was holding down onto the workbench. Do you know how much money we lose every month because of your honesty? No, you don't, because you just turn wrenches. I have to keep this place afloat. I have to pay for these lights, these lifts, these tools. And I can't do that if my lead mechanic is giving away free labor to movie stars. Mark looked around the shop. He looked at the other guys, pretending to work. He looked back at Frank. I worked on that bike on my own time, Frank. It didn't cost the shop a dime in labor. I was off the clock. It cost us the opportunity. Frank yelled, spit flying from his lips. It's about potential revenue. And frankly, I can't trust you anymore. If I tell you to sell a brake job, are you going to tell the customer their brakes are fine? If I tell you to replace a tire, are you going to patch it? You are a liability, Mark. You are a bad employee. Mark felt a knot tighten in his chest, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was relief. He realized he didn't want to work here. He didn't want to be part of this scam. He straightened his back and looked Frank in the eye. So what are you saying, Frank? Frank picked up the papers he had slammed down and shoved them into Mark's chest. I'm saying you're fired. Clean out your locker. Get your stuff and get out of my shop. And don't bother asking for a reference. I'll make sure nobody in this town hires you. I'll tell everyone you stole from me. Mark took the papers. It was his termination notice already printed out. Frank had prepared it before Mark even arrived. That hurt a little, the lack of trust, the premeditation. But Mark just nodded. Fine, Mark said. He turned around and walked to his locker in the break room. He didn't slam the door. He didn't shout. He just opened his metal locker and took out his personal tools, a set of wrenches his dad had given him, a lucky rag, a photo of his first car. He put them in his small toolbox. It didn't take long. He didn't have much here. When he walked back out onto the shop floor, the other mechanics stopped working. They watched him carry his box toward the exit. Frank was back in his office, already on the phone, probably yelling at a supplier. Mark walked past the other guys. Dave, the young one, finally looked up. Sorry, Mark, Dave whispered. Don't be Dave, Mark said softly, stopping for a second. Just remember what I taught you. The bike comes first. The customer comes first. The money is just the side effect. Mark pushed the front door open and walked out into the bright California sun. The air smelled better out here. He didn't have a job. He didn't have a paycheck coming. He had rent to pay and bills piling up. But as he walked to his car, carrying his toolbox, he felt lighter than he had in years. He still had his dignity. He still had his name. And for the first time in a long time, he slept okay at night knowing he didn't let a greedy man destroy a simple act of kindness. He got into his car and started the engine, wondering where the road would take him next. The first few days of unemployment felt like a strange kind of vacation. Mark woke up without an alarm clock. He drank his coffee slowly, watching the sun rise through the window of his small apartment. He didn't have to rush to beat the traffic. He didn't have to smell the exhaust fumes of the city or listen to Frank's voice screaming about numbers. But by the end of the first week, the silence in the apartment stopped being peaceful and started feeling heavy. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears when you are alone with your thoughts too much. Mark sat at his kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills. Rent was due in 3 days. His phone sat on the table, too quiet. He had sent out resumes to every auto shop in the city. He knew the owners of half of them personally. He had helped them fix their own cars in the past, shared a beer with them at the local bar. But nobody was calling back. He decided to go out and visit a few shops in person. He put on his best pair of jeans and a clean shirt, grabbed his toolbox, and drove across town to Sal's garage. Sal was an old-timer, a guy who always said, I hire the best hands, not the best talkers. Mark walked into the office. expecting a warm welcome. Sal was behind the desk, eating a sandwich. He looked up when Mark walked in, and his smile instantly faded. He looked down at his sandwich, avoiding Mark's eyes. "Hey, Sal," Mark said, trying to sound cheerful. "Just wanted to see if you had any openings. I can turn a wrench." Sal wiped his mouth with a napkin and sighed deeply. "Look, Mark, you're a good mechanic. Maybe the best in the city. But I can't hire you. Why not?" Mark asked, feeling a knot form in his stomach. "Is it because of what happened at Steel City?" Sal leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's a small town, Mark. Frank has already made the calls. He's telling everyone you were stealing parts. He said you got caught red-handed selling shop inventory on the side. He said you have a gambling problem and you needed cash." Mark felt like he had been punched in the stomach. He leaned against the doorframe for support. "That's a lie. He's saying that because I fixed Keanu Reeves' bike for a fair price." "I know that," Sal said, looking sad. "And you know that. But the other shop owners? They don't want to take the risk. Frank threatened to blacklist any shop that hires you. He's got friends at the parts distributors too, Mark. If I hire you, he might slow down my orders. I can't run my business like that." Mark nodded slowly. He understood. It was a dirty game, and Frank played to win. He didn't just fire Mark. He was trying to ruin him. "It's okay, Sal," Mark said quietly. "I understand." Mark walked out to his car and sat there for a long time. He looked at his hands, calloused, scarred, covered in grease that never seemed to wash away completely. These hands had fixed engines that other people said were unfixable. They had saved lives by making sure brakes worked. But now, because of one greedy man with a big mouth, these hands were useless. Over the next 2 weeks, Mark's situation got worse. He stopped looking for mechanic jobs. He knew the door was closed. He started applying for whatever he could find. He worked a few days moving boxes in a warehouse. He helped a neighbor paint a fence for $50. It was humiliating work that anyone could do. It didn't use his brain or his skill. It felt like his talent was a bird trapped in a cage, dying of thirst. He started to wonder if he had made a mistake. At night, lying in bed, he would replay the scene in his head. Asterisk, what if I had just kept my mouth shut? What if I had let Frank charge Keanu $5,000? I would still have a job. I would still have my dignity. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe honesty is just a luxury for people who can afford it. Asterisk, but then he would remember the look on Keanu's face. The relief. The genuine smile. And he would think, asterisk, no, I did the right thing. But doing the right thing doesn't pay the rent. Asterisk, it was a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after he lost his job. Mark was sitting on his couch, watching a talk show on TV, trying to distract himself from the empty refrigerator. His phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, with a local area code, but a prefix he didn't know. He almost let it go to voicemail. He was tired of rejection. He was tired of telemarketers asking if he wanted to extend his car warranty on a car he couldn't afford to drive. But something made him pick it up. "Hello?" He said, his voice flat. "Hi, is this Mark?" "The mechanic?" The voice was female, professional, and very polite. Mark sat up straighter. Yeah. This is Mark." "Hi, Mark. My name is Julie. I'm calling on behalf of Arch Motorcycle. May I have a moment of your time?" Mark frowned. Arch Motorcycle. He knew the name. It was a high-end custom bike company, but he didn't know much else. "Okay. Is this about a job application?" "I didn't apply there." "No, you didn't?" Julie said. She sounded like she was smiling. "We received a call from a colleague of yours. A Mr. Keanu Reeves." Mark nearly dropped the phone. He stood up, pacing the small living room rug. "Keanu Reeves? The guy with the Norton? What about him?" "Mr. Reeves recently visited our facility," Julie explained. "He told us a story about a mechanic at a shop called Steel City Choppers. He told us that this mechanic fixed his bike after hours, saved him a lot of money, and treated him with incredible respect when everyone else was trying to take advantage of him. He said this mechanic was fired specifically for being honest. Mark felt a flush of heat rise up his neck. Yeah, that happened. Mr. Reeves was very upset by that, Julie continued. He told our management team, "You need to find this guy. He's the kind of person I want working on my bikes," so I did some digging. It wasn't easy finding your number since you aren't listed, but here I am. That's... Wow, Mark stammered. He didn't know what to say. That's really nice of him. But I don't work on custom bikes, ma'am. I mostly do repairs on older stuff. That's actually exactly what we're looking for, Julie said. We are opening a new service and restoration wing at Arch, specifically for vintage models. We need a lead technician. Someone who understands the history of the machine. Not just how to plug in a computer. Mr. Reeves personally recommended you for the position. Mark leaned against the wall, his knees feeling a little weak. A lead technician? Yes, the salary is double what you were making at your previous shop. Full medical, dental, vision, and a performance bonus. And Mr. Reeves insisted on one specific condition in the contract. Mark's heart was hammering in his chest. What condition? That you have full autonomy over the repairs, Julie said. No quotas, no upselling. Just honest work. That's what he asked for. Mark closed his eyes. He thought about Frank's angry face. He thought about the lies Sal had told him. And he thought about Keanu Reeves, the stranger who remembered the guy who fixed his bike. When can I start? Mark asked, his voice shaking just a little. Julie laughed warmly. Can you be here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for a tour and an interview? I think it's just a formality, but we need to meet you. I'll be there, Mark said. I'll definitely be there. Mark hung up the phone and stood in the middle of his living room. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of possibilities. He looked at his hands again. They were still greasy, still scarred, but they weren't useless anymore. They were about to build something new. He walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and smiled. It was empty, but that didn't matter. He was going to be okay. The drive to the Arch motorcycle facility felt longer than it actually was. Mark's stomach was doing flip-flops the entire way. He left his house early just in case traffic was bad, but mostly because he couldn't sit still. When he finally pulled up to the address, he wasn't sure he was in the right place. It didn't look like a garage. It looked like a modern art museum or a high-tech spaceship. The building was sleek, with glass walls and polished steel surfaces reflecting the bright California sun. There were no oil stains on the driveway, no piles of old tires in the corner. It was clean, immaculate. Mark parked his old car between two brand new pickup trucks and looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He had combed his hair and he was wearing his cleanest blue jeans. He looked like a mechanic, which was good, but he felt like a fish out of water. He grabbed his small toolbox, the one containing his father's wrenches, and took a deep breath. If this didn't work out, he didn't know what he was going to do. He walked through the front doors, and the smell hit him instantly. It wasn't the thick, suffocating smell of dirty oil and burnt rubber like at Frank's shop. It smelled like fresh metal, leather, and expensive coffee. It was the smell of quality. A young woman at the front desk stood up immediately. She had a warm smile. "Mark?" she asked. "Yeah, that's me," Mark said, feeling a little nervous. "I'm Julie. We spoke on the phone. It's so good to meet you. Come on back. Mr. Reeves is already here." Mark followed her through the showroom. On pedestals around the room sat the most beautiful motorcycles Mark had ever seen. They weren't just machines. They were pieces of art. The frames were welded with such precision they looked like liquid metal frozen in time. The tanks were smooth and curved. Mark wanted to stop and stare at every single one of them, to check the welds and the lines. But Julie kept walking. They went through a set of double doors into the workshop area. It was bright, filled with natural light from skylights above. The floors were a polished epoxy that looked like you could eat off them. Technicians in clean uniforms were working at stations that looked more like laboratories than mechanic bays, and there, standing near a workbench at the far end, was Keanu Reeves. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, looking over a set of blueprints with a serious expression. He didn't look like a movie star right then. He looked like an engineer, deeply focused on his work. Julie cleared her throat softly. Keanu looked up. When he saw Mark, his face broke into that familiar, genuine smile. He didn't have security around him. He didn't have an entourage. He walked over and extended his hand. "Mark," he said, shaking Mark's hand firmly. "Thanks for coming. I was hoping you'd make it." "Thank you for the opportunity, sir," Mark said. "I'm still a little surprised, to be honest." "Don't be," Keanu said. He gestured around the room. "This place, we build bikes from scratch. But we're starting a new division for restorations and service. We want to take care of the classics, not just the new stuff. But to do that, I need people who respect the machine. People who don't just see a bike as a collection of problems to fix for money." Keanu turned to Julie. "Julie, why don't you show Mark around the shop? Let him see what we do. I'll catch up with you guys in a bit." Julie led Mark on a tour. She showed him the design room, the fabrication center where they cut metal with lasers, and finally, the service bay. It was quiet here, waiting for the first customers. The tools were top of the line, the kind Mark had only dreamed of using. "This would be your station," Julie said, pointing to a large bay with a heavy-duty lift and a pristine tool cabinet. "You'd be the lead tech. That means you pick the jobs. You train the younger guys. And you decide what needs to be fixed and what doesn't. No quotas. No selling things people don't need." Mark ran his hand along the smooth metal of the workbench. It felt cool and solid. "No quotas? You mean if a guy comes in with a loose bolt, I just tighten it?" "Exactly," Julie laughed. "Imagine that." They finished the tour and met Keanu back in his office, which was surprisingly messy. It was filled with sketches of bike parts, books on engineering, and half-empty cups of coffee. It was the only room in the building that looked like a real person worked there. Keanu sat on the edge of his desk looking at Mark. "So, Julie tells me you're between jobs because of what happened at the last place." Mark looked down at his boots. "Yeah, the owner, Frank, wasn't too happy that I didn't charge you $5,000 for a 10-cent fix. He fired me the next day and, well, he's been telling people I steal parts so I can't get a job anywhere else." Keanu shook his head slowly, his jaw tightening. "I hate that. I hate that guys like that exist in this world. A motorcycle shop should be a sanctuary. It should be a place where riders go to solve problems, not to get robbed." He looked Mark in the eye. "You did me a huge favor, Mark, not just by fixing the bike, but by being honest. I've been in this business a long time, in Hollywood and in the bike world. People usually want something from me. You didn't want anything. You just wanted to help me get back on the road. That matters. I just did what my dad taught me," Mark said softly. "Treat people the way you want to be treated. And that's exactly why I want you here," Keanu said firmly. "I don't need a mechanic who follows orders to cheat people. I need a mechanic with a conscience. Someone who loves these bikes as much as I do." Keanu stood up and grabbed a folder from his desk. He held it out to Mark. "This is an offer letter. The salary is good, better than the industry standard. Full benefits. And a bonus at the end of the year if the customer satisfaction scores stay high. But mostly it comes with a promise." Mark took the folder. He didn't open it yet. "What promise?" "That I will never tell you to lie to a customer," Keanu said. "You fix what's broken. You tell the truth. And if anyone gives you trouble for it, they have to answer to me." Mark felt a lump in his throat. He looked at the folder, then at Keanu, then around the beautiful shop. He thought about Frank, sweating in his greasy office, counting money he didn't earn. Frank had money, but he would never have this. Frank would never have the respect of the people he worked with. "I don't know what to say," Mark said, his voice cracking a little. "Except thank you." "Just say you'll start tomorrow?" Keanu grinned. "I have a 1973 Ducati that's making a weird noise, and I need someone I can trust to tell me if it's serious or if I'm just paranoid." Mark smiled. It was the kind of smile that started in his chest and spread all the way to his toes. "I'll be here at 8 and I'll bring my own tools." Keanu walked him to the front door. As they walked out into the sunshine, Keanu clapped a hand on Mark's shoulder. "Oh, and Mark? If you ever see Frank again, don't be mad at him. You won? You're riding?" "He's just standing still." Mark watched Keanu walk back toward the shop, hands in his pockets, heading back to work like a regular guy. Mark got into his car and started the engine. The old engine sputtered and coughed a bit before settling into a rough idle. It wasn't a fancy car. It wasn't a showroom piece. But it was his Dot. He drove home with the windows down, letting the wind blow through the car. He stopped at a grocery store on the way and bought a steak, something he hadn't afforded in months. He thought about the future. He thought about the quiet, clean shop and the bikes he was going to fix. Most of all, he thought about the lesson he had learned through all this trouble. The world could be a hard, unfair place sometimes. There were people like Frank who would try to break your spirit just to make $1. But for every Frank out there, there was someone like Keanu, people who valued the truth. People who remembered a kind act. Mark pulled into his driveway and turned off the car. He looked at his hands resting on the steering wheel. They were clean now, but they wouldn't stay that way for long. And that was okay. He was going to get them dirty, doing work that mattered. He was going to sleep well at night. And that, as Mark finally realized, was something that Frank could never put a price tag on.